Neal Battaglia, saxstation.com. I'm here with an alto saxophone. And actually, the first saxophone that I played, and that was after playing clarinet for a few months, was tenor saxophone. For some reason, I decided to go with tenor. Maybe I kind of heard some tenor players. I think partly it was just because more people were playing alto. I wanted to play something a little bit different, so I went for tenor saxophone. So I mostly played tenor saxophone for quite a while. There were some times when I would play a little bit of alto, even in the first few years, but mostly I was playing tenor. My first saxophone that I got was a tenor saxophone. So when I started to play more alto, I actually wasn't really that comfortable with it at first. It felt a little bit different. You put your fingers in the same places, you play the same kind of things on saxophone. It's not like it's completely different, but it feels different in terms of playing the notes, and it does feel a little bit little bit different under your fingers as well. Things might be a little bit closer together. They might be a different design depending on the model and make of the saxophone as well. But anyway, I was playing more alto maybe a few years ago now. Actually, I started playing more alto, and I do actually perform with alto sometimes. At this point, there's just certain things where it kind of gets in a range that is more like a trumpet. Maybe if you're trying to kind of play a trumpet part, you can get a little bit higher, a little bit easier. You get maybe a little bit fatter sound, even if it's higher compared to like playing altissimo or playing with the palm keys. And so, yeah, so basically I play a little more alto now, and I've taught students on alto as well. Like my beginning saxophone class, I recorded all the music on alto saxophone, on tenor saxophone, on soprano saxophone. So I've been playing more alto, I've been playing more soprano for the last year or so, and I've been playing tenor for quite a while now. With alto, I found that at first I was kind of out of tune when I played. I wasn't used to the saxophone. I didn't really know exactly what place on the cork that would be kind of where I wanted it in general. So you kind of figure that out as you go. You figure out kind of how you need to adapt to the instrument. You kind of learn how the instrument works. And I'm talking about the particular instrument you're playing, because the saxophones can be different even if they're maybe made by the same company. Different models, different years, different situations, everything, there's differences. So I kind of learned how to play more in tune. At this point, I think I basically kind of just go to the place I need to be on tenor and alto. I play in tune. On soprano, and actually part of the reason that happens is because I play with other people. I play in groups with tenor, I play in groups with alto. On the soprano, I've only actually performed in public maybe a couple of times with soprano. When I first got it, I think I didn't really like how I sounded. I knew I needed to put in a lot of work to get a better sound on soprano. And I did practice it quite a bit. It's been about a year. It's not been many years that I've been playing it. But it has been a pretty solid amount of time that I put on the soprano. I think I sound a lot better than I did at first. But it's still kind of the least familiar instrument to me. So tenor being the most familiar. Alto, I've played a bit of alto by this point in my life. Soprano, I'm getting more comfortable with. And this last year, I would say a good percentage of the time I play on saxophone is on soprano, because I did want to improve that. So on soprano, I actually tend to not play as in tune as I do on tenor or alto, which shouldn't be too surprising. It's the least familiar. And I'm also playing an old soprano. It's from 1929. So I would say modern saxophones tend to be a little bit easier to play in tune. That's an advantage of them. They don't necessarily sound exactly the same as a vintage saxophone. Maybe you like the sound on a vintage saxophone better. They can sound pretty good, but it's kind of harder to get a good sound, harder to play in tune throughout the range of the saxophone on a vintage saxophone. So there's trade-offs and there's benefits. So good things, bad things, whether you get modern or vintage. Probably overall, a modern horn is easier to play. It's going to probably sound pretty good. And there's differences on your own preferences and everything. So in soprano, I found it that actually when I brought it to a group with other horns, so two other saxophones we were playing the other week, and I hadn't played soprano with them before. So what I was doing was I was actually kind of bringing it in so I could play a trumpet part on soprano, because you can get a trumpet part, the range, a lot easier on a soprano compared to an alto or a tenor. You can get there with altissimo, but it's more direct with the soprano. So I brought in the soprano, and when I started playing, I was pretty flat. I mean, I wasn't warmed up or anything, but when I started playing, I was flatter than I should be. So what I ended up doing is I pushed in the mouthpiece a bit and just realizing when I was hearing the combination of my sound with the other musicians, I was off. And I figured it was me. So basically, I ended up pushing in the mouthpiece a bit. I end up thinking about it. I kind of adjusted some things in my throat. You kind of do more like an E sound than a ooh sound. Like one will go higher or lower. Yeah, it's kind of a quick tip. If you want to kind of bring up your pitch, maybe think more of E than ooh. Like even when you say those out loud, E sounds higher, ooh sounds lower. So I was playing soprano. I pushed it in. I started listening. I was kind of adjusting more, and I started being more in tune with that group. I played it that week. I brought it back the next week. The next week, I kind of knew where to put the mouthpiece from the start. I knew that I was tending to be flat kind of throughout the range, like consistently. So I would kind of bring up the notes with my throat, with what I'm doing inside my own body. And I was, I think, pretty much in tune actually the second week of just 1 week versus the second week. It was a very big difference. Maybe not quite as in tune as I would be with tenor or alto. Pretty in tune, especially compared to the first time. So I found a place that worked on the cork. And if you're doing things right in your throat, if you know things in your ear and your head, how it should sound, you can actually change the position on the cork. Like Bob Franceschini, he showed us one time, he put it on the top, he put it all the way down, he played in tune anywhere it was. It changed kind of the tone, like whether it's brighter or darker where he put it. So it even made a difference for him, but he could play in tune wherever it was. And I think if you're advanced enough, you can do that. It's going to be more of a difference of tone and color and brightness where you put the mouthpiece. But earlier on, it's going to affect the tuning more because you're not going to have as much control over your intonation. So on soprano, I changed the position a little bit, basically put it in a little bit farther. I thought about bringing up the low notes and the other notes. You can also go sharp pretty easily on an old soprano. So you want to be careful, like up in the palm keys. The palm keys were difficult for me on soprano. They're starting to sound better. I played something yesterday at a rehearsal, and I was playing actually pretty high part. Went up to F with the palm keys, but I think it was mostly in tune. I was playing with the other musicians. It didn't sound like it was really off, but intonation kind of can get away from you if you're mostly practicing on your own. And that's what I was doing with soprano. Like, and part of the reason I was practicing on my own was I wanted to get to a place where I could play with other people. So I was putting in some time. But that's also a little bit dangerous because if you're practicing on your own, you're not really out of tune with anyone else. So maybe you're just kind of a little bit lower in your tuning. And it's not like A440 is the thing that's always been set in music throughout all time. They used to do like A432. I don't think that's a magic number or anything, but there's like some things on the internet about that, about 432. But there are different, basically, frequencies that orchestras even can adjust to basically be in tune with each other, but maybe be a little bit higher, be a little bit lower. So when I was playing soprano, I don't think I was necessarily sounding like completely off or anything, but I was a little bit probably lower than I should have been. And I learned more about kind of where maybe I want to adjust to by playing with other musicians. So if you're learning the saxophone, if you're playing by yourself mostly, that's good. You want to learn how to do things on your own. You want to kind of improve on your own so you can be able to play with other people. But you also want to maybe play with other people fairly soon because you're going to get some interaction with the other musicians, whether it's other saxophone players, with the piano, with the bass, with the guitar, with other instruments. Hopefully everyone's going to be basically in tune. So if they're in tune and they're together and you're off, you kind of want to adjust and get in tune with them. It's something you need to listen for, something you need to figure out how to kind of adjust for. And there's some kind of tricks to it. Part of it is also too, when you just start, it's going to be hard to play in tune actually. You're going to probably want to push on a lot with the mouthpiece to get close. Beginning saxophone players tend to be a little bit flat. And you kind of go from there. You want to listen, you want to work on it, you want to develop some control, and you'll start to play more in tune. But think about playing with other people, and you want to try and blend together. And another thing about blending is it's not just the frequency of the main note that you're playing. The sound of the saxophone is actually a whole bunch it's a combination of a whole bunch of frequencies, and you can kind of break it down using like a Fourier technique. He's a mathematician, so if you're into physics and acoustics, you can learn more about that. Or if you know about it, that's you probably kind of know what I'm talking about. But basically, there's a lot of frequencies that make up a tone, that make up a tone of a saxophone. So when you hear a note on a piano, you can play the same note on like an alto saxophone, but it's going to sound different. The tones are going to be different because it's the same basic note, the same basic frequency, but it's also like a whole combination of other harmonics and different things within that. So it's kind of like a jaggy form for the wave rather than like a straight like sine wave. You can hear a sine wave generated by like a machine, and that's kind of just a straight tone. It kind of sounds not like flat as in like a low tone, but like flat as in like kind of smooth. It's not really that interesting sounding actually. So the difference between all the instruments and voices, things like that, is they have different combinations of harmonics all put together with like a main frequency that you hear. That's kind of what's going to be read on like a tuner or something like that. So yeah, tuning intonation is kind of not as simple as you maybe thought about at first. It's not just pushing in or pulling out your mouthpiece. That's part of it, especially at first, but you can go farther than that. And people like Bob Franceschini, they can pull it out, push it in, play in tune anywhere, just kind of change the color of the tone by using the position of the mouthpiece.